have to venture very far to encounter some of the descendants of Arizona's mining history. Images of the gold prospector walking alongside his trusty burro out to seek his fortune remains ingrained into our nation's past, just as indelible as the cowboy riding off into the western sunset. Unfortunately, our romanticized version of wild burros has given way to the harsh realities of their impact upon the landscape.
These are pack animals that they had that they just turned loose, so probably a better description, instead of calling them wild, we like to call them as feral, which gives people a little bit better of a description of they're not native to Arizona.
They may not be native to Arizona, but they thrive here. Burros evolved thousands of years ago in the deserts of North Africa, where the climate is much harsher, making our southwestern deserts a very hospitable environment for them.
Even in our worst years, our habitat's lush to them, and they're able to survive more so than even our native animals, the bighorn sheep or the mule deer.
While most western states have more free-roaming horses than burros, Arizona is just the opposite. Our wildlands are not necessarily good horse country, but the burros are making the most of it, with nearly 2,000 of them, compared to about 400 horses.
The burros do cause a number of problems. There's lots of trailing. They cause dust beds where they basically wallow. It's like a buffalo wallow. They wallow in the dirt. They do affect our habitat, the trees, the Palo Verde trees. They love to eat on them. And the thing about a burro, or it's like a horse. A burro and a horse are the same, in the same basic family. They have upper and lower incisors. So when they bite, they can bite all the way down to the ground, and they'll actually take the plant and they'll nip it all the way down to the ground. Whereas a bighorn sheep or even a cow or deer does not have upper incisors. It only has lower incisors. So when a deer comes, it basically just kind of picks at things, but it doesn't nip, what we call nipping, all the way down to the base of the tree or base of the plant. And when you nip something all the way down to the base, it takes a lot longer for that to regrow or resprout.
Wildlife Manager Stuart Conkey patrols Game Management Unit 44A, which includes Alamo Lake, and he struggles with a system that seems ineffective at controlling the damage the herds are doing to the area.
Burros are a federally protected animal from the Wild Horse and Burro Act in the mid 1970s. The Game and Fish does not have management control over them. It's one of the few animals Arizona Game and Fish cannot manage or control. The management and control of burros is strictly underneath the Bureau of Land Management. They're like everybody else in government. Their budgets have been very strapped, and in the past they have not had the money to remove burros. The Wild Horse and Burro Act states that they will allow burros in areas that were occupied at the time of the act. So they went out back in the 70s and they took maps and they drew circles around all the areas that they had burros. That is what we call a herd area. Now once they decided the herd areas, then they looked at whether there was water for them, whether the land status, whether it's private land, state land, that sort of thing. And so they derived what's called herd management areas. So that's where our burros should be today, is within these herd management areas.
Since burros can't read maps, a herd management area looks pretty much the same to them as every other area. And as their numbers continue to grow, it falls to the federal government to control their population.
Once they derive a herd management area, then they come in and try to figure out what's called an AML, or appropriate management level. It's kind of like if you had a livestock permit, this is how many cows you could have on this range. Well, they derived an AML, appropriate management level, for Alamo for about 160 animals. We were at pretty close to that after in 2005. We haven't done any surveys. They haven't had the money to do surveys, or they haven't had the money to do roundups since then. The average burro herd their reproduction rate's about 17, anywhere between 15 and 20%. Around here, we've kind of figured out it's about 17 to 18%. So every year you're going to have a recruitment rate of 18%. So that means within 4 to 5 years, they double their population.
2 minutes. 2 minutes remain.
This is a wild horse and burro adoption. The Bureau, the BLM, we gather excess wild horses and burros throughout the western United States and put them up for adoption. We try to find good homes for these animals. These are excess animals that the range just would not support, so we bring them in, we give them all of their vaccinations, we check them and everything, and then we try to find good homes for them for somebody to take care of them. After a year, then they're eligible to get titled for them, and then they become their animal.
This wild horse and burro adoption event was held in Flagstaff, one of several the BLM holds each year around the state. Most of the horses were from Idaho and Nevada, but nearly all of the burros came from Arizona. Erica and Michael Pillow of Flagstaff came here specifically looking to adopt a burro.
We recently lost one of our other horses, and we'd like to have a companion for our other one. We obviously think they're very cute and easy keepers, and so it would just be exciting to get one.
For somebody who's interested in adopting a burro, mainly, be sure that they have the facilities and the patience. It's going to take a little patience just to get them gentled down. If people expect them to be able to be petted, immediately, that's obviously not going to happen, but it's amazing how quick they come along. And, patience and working with the animal, they respond very, I think, in relation to horses, they respond a little bit quicker. And they'll gentle down and be following you around before you know it.
Sometimes it was hard to tell who was more curious, the potential bidders or the burros.
I have previously sponsored wild mustangs and burros before, and I really feel like this is an important part of managing our land, is culling. So I think this is important for people to rescue these rather than by breeding.
While the burros drew a lot of attention from the crowd, the Pillows were the only people to adopt one, a scruffy fellow they planned to name Carlos. Several of the horses found new homes, but the rest face an uncertain future.
We're trying to find these animals a good home, but basically because the laws tells us we have to. We've got, right now we've got 24,000 wild horses in the Midwest and South Dakota that are excess animals that there's no adoption demand for whatsoever. And so we're taking care of them. We're paying for a rancher to run wild horses for us rather than cattle. The horses and the burros continue to reproduce regardless of what we try. We always have to remove excess animals, and therefore, it helps us to kind of relieve some of the strain on our budget of having to feed these animals and have them standing in feedlots rather than somebody's corral that's going to do something with the animal. The horses, we've had these wild horses in the Olympics. They do all the fancy riding stuff. You can train the wild horse to do anything that you can do with any domestic horse. Burros, kids can ride them, you can pack them, you can do all kinds of stuff with them. They're great pets. They get real friendly real quick.
The federal government is considering new legislation that would change the way these herds are managed in the future. But in the meantime, the best that wildlife managers like Stuart Conkey can do is try to deal with the situation at hand.
So not only do they tear apart the habitat, they cause trailing, which causes erosion. They're very protective of their areas. And typically, if you have a lot of burros in an area, you're not going to see a lot of deer, a lot of bighorn sheep. Some of the other things they do carry diseases that will affect our native deer and sheep population. So basically, they're not a native animal. They hurt the habitat that they're in, and for the most part they're more productive than our native animals.